It's 2017, and this year Parks Canada wants you to get outside. So much so that they're offering free year-long discovery passes that will give you unlimited access to all of Canada's national parks, conservation areas, and historic sites to mark Canada's 150th anniversary. Now, while the initiative is being praised for encouraging people to see our parks, some conservationists are worried that an increased focus on visitation could be detrimental to wildlife. For more, we're joined by Alison Woodley, the National Director of the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society's Parks Program. Alison, thank you for being here this morning.
My pleasure.
Okay, so let's start with this free pass initiative. I don't think anyone would think that it's a bad idea to promote visiting parks, but it does create some conservation concerns. Can you talk to me about those concerns?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody agrees that it's a lovely idea and a lovely gift to Canadians for this big birthday year to have free access to our national parks and encourage people to get out and visit them. The challenge is how it's implemented, and particularly in the context of what else is going on in our national parks right now. We already know that many of our parks are bursting at the seams. Visitation is already up in some parks more than 20% over the last couple of years because of the low Canadian dollar in large part. And so how do we manage an increase in visitation in ways that don't actually harm the wildlife and the nature that our parks are fundamentally there to protect? And so that's the challenge.
Well, I think a lot of people at home right now are seeing the beautiful pictures on the screen. They're seeing these massive tracts of land, and they're wondering how many people could actually show up that could do damage. I mean, what numbers are we dealing with here?
Well, I mean, the numbers are there's millions and millions of people who visit our national parks. In Banff and Jasper are particularly busy. There are some that get enormous visitation, and so that's where the biggest challenges are. And of course, so we really need a plan in place in order to manage this potential spike in visitation better. And so some of the things that Parks Canada can do, they can encourage people to visit less visited national parks and really promote some of the hidden gems of our national park system. We need a transportation plan in place so that there's less vehicles. The last thing people want is to end up in gridlock in their national parks, and we already saw some of that last year. For example, the RCMP had to close the exit at Lake Louise on the Trans-Canada Highway in Banff because there were so many people that emergency vehicles couldn't get up the roads on the long weekend in August. So things like public transportation, like putting in mandatory shuttles to some of the most popular destinations in our national parks, requiring people to reserve ahead. Those are some of the things that they can put in place in order to prevent kind of gridlock and impacts on wildlife, reduce the impacts on wildlife, and also make sure people have positive experiences. The other thing that's really important is education. Parks Canada's education programs and their conservation programs were very severely cut over the last decade. And so, for example, the conservation capacity of the agency has dropped by a third since 2012. So we need to make sure that there's enough investment in conservation, in education, so that everybody who enters the park understands how they need to behave in order to not impact wildlife, and also to make sure that we understand the impacts that we're having on wildlife and are able to mitigate those by investing in science and conservation.
Alison, I think one of the things that surprised me most when getting ready for this story was that it seems that conservation and visitation are two opposing forces within Parks Canada. Is that a reality?
Well, they don't need to be. I mean, yes, there are potentially serious impacts. For example, in Banff last year, we saw situations where Parks Canada actually had to kill several wolves and elk in Jasper and Banff National Parks because they became habituated to people, because there was food left out, and those wolves got into that food in the campgrounds, in the picnic areas, and they became so used to people that they became aggressive. And when you get habituated wildlife, because those interactions are not managed properly, it's the wildlife that usually suffer. And we have to understand that at the end of the day, our national parks are there to conserve nature, and we have the responsibility to pass that along unimpaired to future generations of Canadians. And so there does need to be a really strong focus on conservation and education in our national parks, and that's drifted over the last decade. We released a report last year that really highlighted the increased development pressures in our national parks and the drop in funding to the conservation programs. Now, the good news is it is 2017 and it's a new year. And there is hope for this year. Our current government has committed to limiting development in our national parks and to restoring science and conservation funding in our parks. And this month, Minister McKenna, the minister responsible for national parks, is launching a nationwide consultation, a public consultation to ask Canadians for their views on the future of our national parks. So that's an opportunity for Canadians really to chime in and let the government know that they really want these places well conserved and well protected so they and our grandchildren can enjoy them in the future, and wildlife can really use these places as safe sanctuaries.
We're going to leave it there on that positive note to begin 2017. Alison Woodley, National Director of Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society's Parks Program, thank you very much for being here, and Happy New Year.
Thanks so much, Ben. Happy New Year to you.